Hello, I'm Cathy Erickson, and I am pleased to be here today with Shannon Gaskill from Coldwell Banker Plaza East and Traci Terrill with Keller Williams Hometown Partners. Thanks, ladies, for joining me in what is the 5th installment of our RSCK EdTV, otherwise known as We Get Together and Talk About Stuff. So anyway, we are going to talk today about working with buyers, managing your buyers' expectations, and I've got some questions here that I'm going to ask, but you know, we can take this in a direction if we go there. So feel free to veer away from these questions if there's something else that you think we want to bring up and talk about. But let's talk about first about, you know, meeting new buyers and how you handle that and how you set up that first appointment and what you talk about during that first appointment. You know, or do you, I'm sure you probably want to know first of all if they've been pre-approved and how important that is for a first step. So Traci, why don't you start and kind of walk us through that?
Well, I'll tell you, that's kind of changed for me this past year. I kind of went to a training class and had this epiphany that usually we ask the buyer before we set the appointment, are you pre-approved with a lender? Mm-hmm. And then I went through this training class and he says, well, why don't you come in and meet with them first? Mm-hmm. Because then you can really help them a little bit more as far as selecting the right financing person. And finding and understanding, you know, what their specific needs are. Plus, it gives you an opportunity to build a rapport. And so it was like, it kind of changed that aha of, yeah, let me set an appointment with someone who's not pre-approved, bring them in, build a rapport with them, really understand their needs and wants in the buyer's consultation. And then at that point, work on trying to get them pre-approved with the lender. And so, and yeah, and usually always bring them in for a buyer's consultation first. Seems to work out because that really allows us to set the expectation with them up front of what they can expect during the whole entire process.
Right. And so during that process, you're talking about the market and, you know, whether,
The first part is really designed, of our buyer's consultation and our team, is really designed to focus on the overall process. And then the second part of it is the buyer's wants and needs analysis.
Gotcha.
And so the first part is really setting that expectation of, you know, the first step is selecting a realtor. The second step is getting financing pre-approved, you know, and then moving through the process of selecting homes and then viewing homes and what we do in the viewing process. And then, of course, what to expect afterwards from appraisals and home inspections. And
yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more. Shannon, what about you? What's your first step when you meet a new buyer at an open house or, you know, through a referral?
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to handle buyers is meeting with them. However, if I'm on the phone or at an open house, I try to determine, are these first-time home buyers? Are they experienced in the process? That's going to kind of lead me to my next questions and find out, you know, how experienced are they? Are they first-time home buyers? If so, I'm going to start at the very, you know, beginning, and not that you don't with all, but I think that a lot of times I'll meet my buyers at the first property and we'll just start there and build a relationship, but I definitely think the buyer consultation is a great idea.
Yeah, but sometimes buyers are, I've done that too. It really just depends on the situation, where if it's a referral from someone that I know, that I trust, I'll meet them at a property the first time. But if it's someone I don't know, we're meeting at my office. We're having a little sit down before we start opening doors.
And that also goes too with that first interaction, that first phone call. You know, you are, not to sound scripty, but in a way you are, you know, kind of doing some pre-qualification questions before you set the appointment and meet with them.
And At your buyer consultation, do you actually view properties on the computer and kind of try to narrow the properties that you're going to see down before you even go out, or is that not part of that?
Sometimes I'll pull up some properties. The biggest thing is just really understanding their wants and needs and asking them the engaging questions. So for example, they say, you know, I want 4 bedrooms. Okay, well, why are 4 bedrooms important to you? You know, how many kids do you have? You know, maybe it's a case they really want they need 3 bedrooms, but they really want an office space. Okay, well then that helps me narrow down the criteria of how we put things into the MLS. And you know, when they say they want a big yard, well, I mean, I had 3 acres, so to me that was a big yard. You know, is a standard lot. You know, is that going to be big enough? That sort of thing. So then it's really just having that conversation with them. The other thing is it also allows me, since it is in my environment a lot of times with the buyer's consultation, you know, usually I'm bringing them into the office or meeting on a neutral playing field. It allows me to go, okay, Traci, these folks don't buy a house every day. And I deal with this process day in and day out. So it allows me to slow down and really make sure they understand the process and really gather and listen to them. Where sometimes realtors, we like to talk a lot.
That's funny you say that, because I always tell my buyers that exact thing. I do this every day in, day out. If I ever go too fast or don't explain something, you know, the best, let me know, slow me down, and ask me questions, because I do. I mean, you know, we get to going and we just take it for granted that we know the process. And
it's when they get the deer in the headlights look, you know you're going too fast, and they're not absorbing anything else at that point.
Right.
You know, and that's when you know you have to say, okay, we, you know, probably done for today.
They take that deep breath and they're like overwhelmed. It's like, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But sometimes you have buyers that they're not new buyers, they're seasoned, you know, real estate buyers, and they want to move quickly, and then you just kind of, you know, you just ride that because they don't need the sit down, they don't need the, you're wasting their time.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and even if they have purchased a house before, a lot of times it's just an opportunity to really gather what they want, because nobody wants to go out and show houses that don't meet their criteria. I mean, we've all been victim of that. I mean, we've all went out and showed someone, they go, well, this is not anything like what I expected. Okay, that's not the buyer's fault. That's our fault, because we didn't do a good enough job understanding what their wants and needs are. And by sitting down up front, even with a seasoned buyer, you're sitting with them up front and you are setting those expectations. Because the market, when they purchased their house even 6 months to a year ago, the market could be completely different than what it is now. And so now you're going into talking, and maybe it's a case of talking about their wants and needs, but you're also talking about what the market is right now and what they can expect to get for their money versus maybe the last time when they purchased a house too. So.
Right, yeah. And so do you talk in one of those first meetings, do you talk about kind of the process of writing an offer and what it's like to write an offer in a very competitive market, and that they might not be able to, you know, if they're in a multiple offer situation, they might not be able to, you know, ask for those closing costs or that kind of thing? I mean, do you get into that before you ever find the right house to lay that groundwork?
To me, first of all, I put together a buyer's packet that includes a contract, so you know, they can lay their eyes on what it's going to look like to make an offer. However, to me, it depends on what price point they're in, because it won't necessarily be a multiple offer situation if they're, you know, over 300, and even if it is, I don't really want to give them anxiety about making an offer. So unless I know there's a house that has a lot of activity, I'll talk to the agent, then I'll explain a multiple offer situation. But until it's necessary, I probably not.
Or until they ask you, because they're reading about it.
Yes,
you know, it's all over the news. Multiple offers, you know, seller's market, blah, blah, blah. And so it usually comes up in conversation with my buyers pretty quick. And maybe that is because they're anxious about it. Nobody wants to be in a multiple offer situation, and so, but sometimes that's just the way it goes.
Yeah. A lot of times, like I said, one of the expectations that I try to set, and of course it does depend on what price point that they're at, because like you said, you nailed it right on the head.
Yeah.
You know, here's all this talk about how it's, you know, it's a seller's market right now, but not at all price points, not in all areas, not in all locations. You know, houses with different features have, you know, different days on market. And
it's a blanket statement that really shouldn't be a blanket statement.
Right.
Well, it really is. And then also getting them to understand that in the multiple offer situation, we've got to put our best foot forward. And by putting our best foot forward, maybe it's a case that we get a stronger pre-approval. You know, maybe it's a case that, what can we do? Let's look at the financing, let's run some numbers ahead of time to where maybe we don't have to ask for those closing costs and prepaids. Or, what type of loan financing? Maybe we get into, some of the grant programs or something like that to where that takes care of it, and now you've got to come up with it as your down payment. So then we can put ourselves in a little bit better position.
Right.
Letters,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have a,
They
and
still work, don't they?
They
really do.
because I'm telling you what, I have a seller right now that's very emotionally attached to his property, and the letter that we received on one of his offers from a buyer's agent was incredible about how all they could see is them raising their children in this household, and he had just raised his kids in this household.
Oh.
So that was important to him. So, it's like thinking about those little things, and also setting maybe some expectations that the days of 500, 1,000, 2,500 in earnest money isn't going to cut it.
Mhm.
We need to be stronger. We need to have some more, show the seller that we're gonna have some more skin in the game.
Do you guys use a certain percentage of the sale price, or how do you, because I've always struggled with that, honestly. It's
I
like,
have two.
sure, it depends on the price of the house. You can't put down a $50 earnest money deposit.
Well, unless you're
on
a VA loan, because you're gonna get your $50 back,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
and so when you get up into the higher price points, what's appropriate? I've always thought that it should be just a percentage just across the board, so that it eliminates that question, but what do you guys use as a guide for that?
Normally.
Yeah, I'll let you answer this one.
I don't know, there's not a right or wrong
There
answer.
really isn't, and since it's not a requirement, it's in the price point of, let's say, 150 to 200, 500 to 1,000. If you're over 250, really anywhere from 2,500 to 4,000 would be my suggestion. But it's really up to the buyer. We can coach them, but they're going to make the decision ultimately.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of it is too, when you put forth a little bit more skin in the game and you tell the buyer, hey, you know what, let's put some skin in the game. It also helps you from a buyer's agent perspective too. Because, sometimes buyers, if they're on the fence, they need to understand that if you arbitrarily back out of this contract, you will forfeit that money.
Right.
And
Exactly. It
and
makes them think about it.
And maybe I'm from the school of thought that, 250 and 500 earnest money, those days are gone. It needs to hurt a little bit more for somebody to be able to just back out of a contract.
They need to take it serious, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's my own personal opinion on that.
Yeah, no,
but,
I agree.
It really helps making sure that the buyer understands the importance of a legally binding contract.
Right. Yes. Right. Well, one thing I want to talk about, because we, are in a seller's market, and when those great little houses come up that, there's going to be a rush, how do you handle scheduling showings and managing your availability for your clients? Because, it's fast moving, and you have to be fast moving, and a lot of times, so how do you handle that? Do you just kind of mark out the months of May through August, and you're gonna just drop it, drop anything to go show a house in the evening if that's the only time it can be done, or what do you do?
It goes back to that initial meeting or their time frame. If they, if they're like, oh, I would like to be in a house in 3 months or so, and they're not as urgent, and it's maybe not in a price point that isn't going to go as fast, then you can kind of manage that and do it according to both of your schedules. However, if it's someone that's immediate and they are in the price point that is in a seller's market, then you probably need to make it work somehow.
Yeah. And I think it also comes to sometimes it's, especially it is. There could be a house that comes on at 9 o'clock in the morning, your buyer doesn't get off of work until 4 o'clock, and by 4 o'clock it's already under contract.
Right.
That's happened to us multiple times.
Yep. It happens every day.
And that's where it goes back to, and the way I manage it is, I usually tell them, okay, when we initially go out, we're gonna schedule a 2-hour time block. We're gonna go look at 5 to 6 houses, usually in that 2 hour. And those are gonna be, and typically they are the best houses that are on the market at your particular, that meets your criteria. So then after that, and I tell them, don't be surprised if you end up writing an offer on one of those first 6 houses. Most buyers do, because those are the best houses that we're gonna show them on the market. And it's funny because by the time you show them 6 or 7 or 8 houses, I am so sorry, I really thought we would have found one by now, you know? And they're apologizing to you for wasting your time, you
Right.
know? And, but a lot of it is after that initial ones, it's only showing them the new ones that come on the market.
Right.
And when the new ones come on, yeah, it's, luckily, I have a team, so we're able to, like, if I can't run over and show them a house, then, you know, one of my
Somebody
team
else
members is, and
can.
we're constantly helping each other just
Yeah.
to try to, because it is, time is of the essence right now.
Yeah.
On some of those really cute golden properties,
Yeah,
you know?
I did that. I had a client that was waiting for, you know, that house.
Mhm.
And that house hit the market like at noon or 1 o'clock. And I saw it, several of the agents that I work with saw it, they knew what she was looking for. They're like, you gotta go. And one guy said, and you better take a contract with you.
Wow.
And she was in the house for 10 minutes. She said, let's write it up. I said, I already did. She signed it at their kitchen table, and we had it under contract within an hour.
Mhm.
But it was a strong, clean contract. There was no messing around.
And clean is the key right now.
Yes.
Yeah, squeaky. I tell my
Yes.
clients, we gotta be squeaky clean if we wanna rise to the top.
That's right.
Because a lot of it is too, though, is we also have to make sure that when we get into that multiple offer situation, that house value is house value, okay? Just because you want closing costs doesn't mean you can necessarily write it on top, because the house may not appraise.
That's right.
You know, and if it doesn't appraise, we better have a backup plan.
Yeah,
And so, you know, we also have to make sure too that in some price points, I kind of feel like things are a little overinflated, only because, you know, we do have multiple offers that's kind of pushing, you know, prices up, and getting those appraisals to support that. It's like, okay, we're writing that offer, but oh, fingers crossed that, you know,
Yeah.
everything goes through the appraisal process, so.
yeah. So when you're meeting with your clients and you start getting to the point where you think you're about to zero in on a house, when do you start talking to them about inspections and what the inspections are intended for? That conversation versus this is not your, you know, get a perfect house card. You can't, this is not what it's intended for. How do you have that discussion? Why don't you start?
I always just, at the point of writing a contract, I always say, okay, if our offer is accepted and we are under contract, your next step is the inspection. And all inspectors, it is their job to completely nitpick the house apart. Even brand new homes have a list, you know, that will be wrong with it. And so we're going to review it and then decide what's most important to you, maybe get some estimates, and then submit it to the seller in writing. And then talk again about the appraisal. I try to tell them, once you're under contract, these things are going to happen.
Right.
Again, even though we probably covered it before.
Right. So Tracy, what about you?
Well, same thing. I mean, it's one of those things, we talk about the home inspection process, especially, I do that, a lot of that in the buyer's consultation as well, is that whenever we are going through and we're looking at a house, you know, if we see a hole in the wall that we want the seller to fix, then we need to put that into the contract.
Right.
We don't wait for home inspections.
Exactly.
Home inspections are only for those items that we should not have been able to see otherwise.
Right.
And because
I think
all of a
that's the
sudden.
exact wording in the contract.
Well, but it's so true, because, you know, we can't go back and ask a seller to, well, I didn't like the carpet in the bathroom. Okay, well, you made the offer based on seeing the carpet in the bathroom. And the other thing is also when we walk through the house, you know, you also have to set the expectation up front whenever you're looking at the houses. I want them to imagine their Christmas tree in the window. I want them to imagine where their furniture is going to go. And I tell them, you know, sometimes I can be a Debbie Downer, because now I'm looking, does it have a Federal Pacific panel?
Right.
What does this basement look like?
Right.
You know, do we need to,
Right.
has there been any kind of repairs? How does the foundation look? And then just tell them that when the home inspector comes out, he's looking at things in their crawl space, he's looking at things in the attic, you know, he's looking for things that, you know, I tell them I'm too chubby and to get into a crawl space anymore. So we're gonna leave that up to the home inspector.
Yeah.
I also feel like it's key to really get that good home inspector. Have you noticed?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
there's good home inspectors and there's awful home inspectors.
Yeah, and
So-
the alarmists are the ones that are, I just want to pull my hair out. Like, I really don't need to go there. You know, I mean,
But do you handle it, do you give them 3 home inspectors to choose from?
Mhm.
Because I
do.
tend to do that just because then it's like, if they have a problem with the inspector at the end, then you chose the inspector.
Right. Well, no, and I usually give them the opportunity that, you know what, there's a whole bunch of different home inspectors in Wichita. You're more than welcome to Google home inspections.
Right.
I do have 2 that I recommend the most. And I tell them honestly, the one that I recommend the most, I feel like he's ethical, he's thorough, and I like the quality of his reports. And I have, at the buyer's consultation, I have a sample home inspection report of a property. And
that's a
so we
good
usually
idea.
take a little bit of time and just say, hey, these are the types of issues
That's a
that they
good
kind of look
idea.
for.
That's
We
a
don't go
great
into
idea.
Yeah.
in detail, but it's
Yeah.
just to kind of give them a little bit of, you know, every house is gonna have issues.
Right.
And oh, by the way, the things that we negotiate, let's focus on big ticket items, not cosmetic
Right.
items. You know,
Right.
let's focus on, you know, if you've got a leaky roof, let's focus on getting a roof replaced,
Yeah.
versus, you know, maybe there is an outlet that's a little loose that could be tightened with a screwdriver, you know, or, you know,
Yeah.
I don't wanna be
Do-
on
do
camera
we
here
have time
saying
for one
something
more?
I should be.
Are we running long? Do we have time for one more? So I want to hop back and just ask you one last question, because I think it comes up with, when you're working with every single buyer client. How do you help them understand and manage their wants versus their needs? Because, you know, you've had clients where they said, we have to have a fireplace. Okay, that's a non-negotiable item. And then they end up falling in love with a house that has no fireplace, and you're sitting there going, well, I guess it was negotiable. I guess it wasn't a have-to-have. So do you tell them
That's a
going
good
in
question.
that you know it's normal if you can get 80% of what's on your list, you're doing well? How do you handle that? How do you manage their expectations or disappointments or?
I don't know about you, that's a very good question, because a lot of times people have a list and they don't end up with at all what's on their list. But for me, it's almost like
So true.
you work with these people and you get to know them so well. You can almost walk into a house and you as an agent feel it, like, oh, this is gonna be the one.
Yeah.
And then they walk in
Before
and
they do.
then you can see it on their face, this is the one. And it doesn't have to check 80% of the boxes, or it's amazing to me how they will have all these items that they have to have, and then they just fall in love with the one.
And it all goes out the window.
And it doesn't matter, yeah. As long as you're doing your job and getting the major things, that's it.
Yeah, and I have to agree with that. I mean, you know, I look at what, and we do have that conversation on what things can be added after you own the home
Right.
versus the things that can't be added.
That's a good
Right.
point.
It's kind of hard to add extra bedrooms. It's kind of hard to add a basement.
Right.
You know, if
Well-
you want a fence, can we add a fence after we have it?
Mhm.
Probably. So let's really focus on the things that we can't change as easy.
Right.
Yeah,
You know, and focus on those. But
I always tell my clients, the one thing you absolutely cannot change about a house is the location.
Absolutely. That's
Find
it.
the location that you want, and literally anything else can be done.
But even location changes with buyers.
Yeah.
Well, true.
You know what I mean?
If they start out thinking they want to be over here and they end up thinking they really love this area, so.
Or maybe they really love this area, but then after they meet with the lender, they realize that maybe they can't afford that area.
Sure.
Exactly.
You know, so we have
Yeah.
to change and we
Yeah.
can adjust, so.
Well, I really appreciate you being here today with us, and it was a great conversation, and you had some really good ideas. I love that inspection
Yes.
report idea. Just
Thank you.
black out all the names and dates, and yeah, that's a really, really good idea. So, oh, yeah, one more question. When you are showing, do you talk before you go into the home about the things that you should discuss
Absolutely.
in the home and the possible presence of recording or listening devices? What do you do? What do you do with that? Because they all want to talk about where are they going? Why are they moving? You know, is it a divorce? Is it, you know, only see men's clothes in the closet? I mean,
Yeah.
it's, how do you manage that?
Yeah. I tell them that we never discuss any pricing strategies in the home,
Okay.
ever. And when they start to say, well, boy, I really like this house. Okay, great. You know what? Let's talk about that outside.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have the conversation outside. And I give them cues of, hey, let's not have that discussion. Because there is, there's recording devices out there. Some of those doorbells, when you go push the doorbell just to make sure nobody's home and all of a sudden you smile, you're on camera.
Right.
Yeah.
I learned that lesson kind of the hard way. And
no.
I had a seller that had a recorded one of those doorbells, and they go, all I heard is they absolutely love the house and they're writing an offer. And I said, well, how did you know? And she goes, oh, because whenever she went to go close the door or whatever, I got it recorded on video. And I go, you can't do that. I can't do that. She's like, well, they didn't say anything about how much they were going to offer. They just really love the house and they're writing an offer. So my seller's waiting. So then I had the conversation with the buyer's agent and said, hey, you know what? Up front with the buyer's agent, hey, here's what transpired. I just want to make sure that you're aware. I was unaware that there was any kind of recording devices, so it does happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And if we don't think that sellers aren't doing it, we're crazy. Even if you're a listing agent and you tell your seller not to, temptation is just too much for them sometimes.
Yeah.
So we really have to make sure we educate our buyers that, no conversations like that.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you. And thanks for joining us today. We will see you again for RSCK EdTV.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.